Hello, everyone. My name is Gary Kroger, and if you're looking for the Look Up Now Climate Candidate event, you are indeed in the right place. I'm going to be the moderator for the next hour as we talk to two climate candidates and a distinguished panel of climate experts. The climate catastrophe is descending upon us at an ever faster pace. Just 2 days ago, the IPCC issued a stark warning that we have a rapidly closing window in which to preserve a livable planet. I'll repeat that, to preserve a livable planet. And the impacts of climate change are growing more severe and more frequent. The world we know today will be vastly different in the next few decades. Today, we're taking advantage of the window that's still open with this event to introduce two climate candidates worthy of your support. Now, you're going to hear about support a lot this evening. We need to be receptive to the idea of support. Elections, and I know this firsthand, are expensive. And there are vast money machine organizations that want to make sure that we don't protect a climate future. So it's imperative that we take climate action now. So as this event unfolds, you're going to hear more than one person ask you to consider financially helping these candidates. Large and small contributions, there's lots of ways to contribute. All donations reflect our shared commitment to bringing the climate message into these elections. Now, before we turn to the candidate of panelists, I want to bring on my good friend to a lot of you, Channing Dutton. I want to bring him into the conversation. This event is in part the product of his work to identify real climate candidates around the country. If we could do this event in person, it would probably be in Channing's living room, and we could all get a chance to know each other up close and personal, and we could probably drink Channing's wine. But it's a Zoom event, so we can't do this, at least not yet. Now, you've probably noticed the website address that Channing created is called Real Climate Candidates, because that's what Channing is all about, finding and helping real candidates, no matter where they're located. A lot of you know Channing, and you know by day he's a lawyer in Des Moines, Iowa. Some say he's Batman at night. But those of us who know him best know that the category of climate alarm, he is in the category of climate alarmists, and will do almost anything to advance action to address climate change. So Channing, you're on. Give us the introduction to the event to help us understand.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you to Ashley and Eric and our panelists for being with us tonight. You know, one of the things that I do is I look for real climate candidates, and I really don't care where they are, because I've learned that there are people who care about climate change, but they run and hide when the chips are down and it's time to talk about the challenges that we all face. And a common friend with Eric Sorensen said, you should make a phone call to Eric Sorensen. And it started that way. I got on the phone with Eric and he blew me away with his commitment, his passion, and his background. And I was so excited about Eric that I donated after the first call. I told my wife about Eric. She didn't even talk to him. She matched that donation. Then I'm spending too much time on Twitter worrying about what's going on with the atmosphere. And Twitter delivered to me Ashley Ward. And as I started looking for Ashley, I found her professional email first. And the next day, she blew me away again. And this was the cornerstone or the seeds that made me think, wow, here are two people who are ready for prime time. They're ready to go. We can count on them to not forget their climate duty after this event tonight. And as I've been working on putting this together, it's a joy to me, because it allows me as a grandfather to think, I am doing things for those who will follow. And so this is why I'm so excited to give you guys the opportunity to not wait for a friend or the internet to deliver you to the climate candidates. So thanks very much for being here tonight.
Thank you, Channing. And that's a very good point. To all of you watching, climate change is not a district-specific concern. we need climate change candidates in Washington. That's how the legislation happens. We need to make the difference all over the country. And here's an opportunity, no matter where you are, to help elect 2 of those climate change candidates. Let me introduce our panel briefly, and they'll be invited to ask questions or to reiterate things that have been said. But this is a conversation. It's not a debate. The idea here is to increase our awareness and to increase the opportunities that we have to spread the climate action message. Just raise your hand as I say who you are. Dr. Michael Mann, at least you're in my corner down there. There you are, a distinguished professor of atmospheric science at Penn State University. In the media, once a comment about what is happening in our atmosphere is made, Dr. Mann is usually the person they go to first. Next up is Ed Maybach. Ed, give a wave. There you are. Dr. Maybach is the director of George Mason University Center for Climate Change Communication. He also directs the Climate Change in the American Mind polling project in conjunction with Anthony Leisowitz of Yale University. Next, we have Bill Schlesinger. Bill is one of the nation's leading ecologists and earth scientists. He's a James B. Duke Professor Emeritus of Biogeochemistry and former Dean of the Nicholas School of the Environment at Duke University. Welcome, distinguished panelists. I am rather humbled by your credentials. I'm just a guy who cares.
And Mirov has joined us.
Oh, Mirov has joined us. Oh, all right, Mirov, I don't see you yet. But Mirov Ben David, there you are. Mirov Ben David, after serving in the Israeli Air Force, studied biology and zoology. She became a professor at the University of Wyoming in 2000 and is a wildlife ecologist. Welcome to our distinguished panel. With no further ado, I'd like to meet the candidates that this evening is really about. First up with us is Dr. Ashley Ward. Waved. Yeah, there you are. You've got your name in the corner there. A Democrat running for the U.S. Congress from North Carolina's 4th District, newly minted 4th District, correct? And also we have Eric Sorensen, a weatherman of great renown, by the way, and a Democrat running for Congress in Illinois' 17th District. Welcome, everyone, and welcome to everyone watching. Ashley, I'm going to start with you. Give us a general sense of Ashley Ward, why you're running, your commitment to climate action, and perhaps tell us something about the background of your district.
Sure. I started my career working for the NOAA RISA program, and the job that I had then was that is a great program that puts science and federal policy and communities together. They sent me off into, this was over 10 years ago, to work in rural communities throughout the Carolinas talking about climate change. And this is really the beginning of what ultimately came my motivation to run for office, because every time we were working and thinking, surely there is going to be somebody who is going to get elected. When you're talking to people who have lost everything, I'm talking about people who, they want to know how much longer they can live in their house before their septic tank fails. How many days next summer they have to make the choice between buying medicine and food or running their air condition or losing access to their home. These are major, major problems, and that our communities are facing, especially frontline communities who have been historically just under-resourced and have the least capacity to deal with what's happening to them. And you keep thinking, when you work in these communities, surely we're going to get really strong advocates in Congress that are willing to do what needs to be done so that we can be worthy of of all of us. Like, they can be worthy. We all deserve better than what we're currently getting.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, nobody's coming. It's going to be up to us. So yeah. I decided to put myself in the race.
And thank you for doing that. And well said. Eric, same thing. Tell us about yourself. Tell us your climate action, motivation, and something about perhaps your district up there in Rockford.
Yeah, I have been a broadcast meteorologist in this district for nearly 20 years. I worked in my hometown of Rockford, Illinois. I was the chief meteorologist at the #1 station, the NBC affiliate there, for about 11 years. I then moved directly to the next TV market over here in the Quad Cities for the past 7 years as the senior meteorologist. I didn't just talk about what the weather was. I didn't just put the 7-day forecast on the air. I talked about how the weather was impacting people's lives. And through it all, I was earning the trust of the communities by telling them the truth and being there for the scary moments, to be with the communities when there were ice storms that took the power out, or with increased flooding, or when families needed to make the decision to go in the basement for a tornado. But also, I was one of the first meteorologists in the country to talk about climate change, to put it within this segment of weather, and to be able to not only put the science there, but to connect the people at home with what was going on that was so outrageous and out of the ordinary. We had many new floods. We had 100-year-old homes taken right off the foundation, and people looked at me and said, "Was that climate?" Yeah. 7 of our top 10 floods here on the Mississippi River have happened since the Great Flood of 1993. And to be able to be on the air and to connect these things that we are seeing with climate change, the increased flooding, the droughts, and then we got the feedback. And the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. The feedback was, hey, finally somebody's on television talking to us about climate change. But also it was the conservatives that said, there's someone talking about climate change. Thanks, Eric, for keeping your politics and your opinion out and keeping just to the science. That was my job. And our ratings went up.
Yeah.
And I became the authority on it. And for me, I had to communicate it. And now I'm running for Congress because I believe that we need that communicator in Congress to be able to talk directly with the people and break that partisan divide. And the polling shows that we're leading the race right
Good.
here.
Good. Thank you. It reminds me, Ashley and I had a moment to speak before the broadcast here. And Ashley pointed out, she said, rural America understands climate change. There's a tendency to think, oh, they're conservative, they're Republicans, they don't get it. They do understand it. Farmers understand the impact on their crops. They know what their yield is. Isn't that right, Ashley?
Oh, I've never had to convince a farmer that climate change is real. And I've worked in rural communities my entire career. And, in this district, with our new redistricting, we have some urban core areas of Durham and Chapel Hill, but we picked up 3 large rural counties. And, they $1 million a year on agricultural losses from extreme events just in this small district. We've got over 60,000 people employed in jobs that put them in exposure for heat illness just in this district. And this isn't really considered a rural district, right? So you can imagine how that is amplified in the districts throughout, North Carolina and the rest of the nation when we talk about how it really impacts individuals and the way they live their lives, the risks that they're under, and, whether or not they can survive.
Well, it's encouraging to think that people do understand the message. But Merab, I have a question for you because you were in the trenches. How hard is it to raise the science voice, if you will, to voters?
Thank you. I ran for the U.S. Senate in 2020. I was the U.S. Senate candidate for the Democratic candidate for Wyoming. And obviously I didn't win, otherwise I would be sitting in Washington, D.C. right now. But again, as Ashley said, you don't need to convince the people who live in rural communities about climate change. They know it. Whether it is beet growers in eastern Wyoming or ranchers in western Wyoming, these people see their cattle dying because there is no water. You don't need to tell them that these are the effects of climate change because many of them, their great-grandparents homesteaded. The family sits on the same ranch for, 150 years. Or in some cases, in the Wind River Reservation, we have Native Americans that, have never left the land. They were squeezed into a small corner of the previous range, but they have seen it. The elders tell everybody, you know, this, we've never seen this before. I never, in all the months and months that I have spent on the campaign trail, which I have to admit was quite challenging with COVID. It was the beginning of COVID and we didn't know what we were doing really. But I did travel across the state in the summer months, outside events. I only had one person challenge my, my storytelling about climate change and how that affects rural communities. Only one person did not agree with me that we are experiencing extreme climate change and need to do something about it. The more common response I got again and again and again is, okay, what are we going to do about it? How am I going to feed my family if my cows are dying and nobody is doing anything about it? And so the main thing I had to think and come up with is, so what do we do? And how do we transition justly to a different economy? And what is the role of these communities in this type of transition? And just like, you know, we have Illinois, North Carolina, and Wyoming, even in Wyoming, each area, each county, I had to come up with a solution that was what we call place-based. And once you brought that up and you gave people alternatives and solutions, they were willing to listen and engaged.
Let's look at the world perspective for a second. And this is open to the panel. We're in school, so raise your hand if you want to speak, but with deference to our candidates, of course. Always, I like to hear from our candidates. Does climate touch the Ukraine situation? What is climate doing to Europe, to Ukraine, to Russia? What are the far-reaching aspects to this changing climate? Anyone? There we go, Michael.
Yeah, thanks. Well, first of all, let me say it's great to be part of this event, and I'm very excited about these two candidates. We really do need, people coming out of the woodwork to enter into politics, to advance the action on the greatest challenge that we face, the climate crisis. And so it's wonderful to be able to support these two great candidates. So, what we're watching play out right now with Russia's invasion of Ukraine is an indication of one of the great costs of our continued reliance on fossil fuels. And so the connection to me is that our dependence on fossil fuels has created these petrostates, rogue petrostates like Russia and Saudi Arabia, and these strongmen who have massive influence and power and access to weapons that was built off of our reliance on fossil fuels and the money that we gave to them to gain access to their fossil fuels. So the same dependence on fossil fuels that is creating the instability that we're seeing play out today in our politics is also creating the instability that we face with the climate crisis. And these things often come together, if you look at the Syrian conflict, for example, the Syrian uprising, that was, the underlying cause there was this unprecedented drought that forced rural farmers into the cities where they were competing for food and water and space with the people who already lived there. That created competition and conflict, and it created a breeding ground for terrorist organizations. And that's the environment in which ISIS formed. And so we have to connect the dots here. It is our same dependence on fossil fuels that is creating the great security crises that we face today. And Joe Biden yesterday alluded to that somewhat in his State of the Union address, but I wish that had been more front and center in the message that he gave to the public.
Well, yesterday, Senator Manchin and others are clamoring for increased production of fossil fuels, oil and gas, as an answer to the Russian aggression. So to the candidates, if you had Joe Manchin in a room, what would you say to him, Ashley?
Well, one of the things that I think that was really a game changer for me thinking about how to talk to a diverse audience about this is in 2017, I sat in on a DOD briefing where the military then elevated climate change as the #1 national security threat to us for all the reasons Dr. Mann just outlined, and even more. I mean, we're seeing the Department of Defense invest, for example, in vehicles with biofuels, or developing vehicles that run, even armored vehicles on or that are EV or biofuels. Why? Because they understand that the supply lines to fuel those get broken. What we're seeing right now, what's happening with the Russian troops, and why they are having such trouble getting into Ukraine is this makes our soldiers less safe. It creates instability around the world in which we tend to have to, as Dr. Mann just outlined, respond to, right? So investing more in fossil fuels means that we're not investing in the things that will actually keep us safer, make our air cleaner and our water cleaner. And so every dollar that we invest or continue to subsidize for fossil fuels is resources that we're not putting toward things like better battery technology and the things that we really need to actually move forward. So to me, those are sunk costs. When it comes to fossil fuel investments, these are sunk costs. It is a conservative idea, if you think about it, right? That we are conservative with these investments in the ways that we get the best return on those investments. And that's what I would say to him.
I will get to, but yes, Channing.
Just real quickly, for the attendees, I see some hands raised in the among
I don't
the
have
attendees.
that ability to see that.
Yes, and then so if you can post your questions to the Q&A, or if you could post to chat, I will see them. Go ahead, Gary.
Okay, well, Michael, I know you want to add something here, but I want to give Eric a chance to piggyback onto that or add your 2 cents.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more that national security is important, and we need to say that. We need to come out and communicate that. And what I would say to Senator Manchin is the people in his district, the hardworking people in his district, are a lot like the hardworking people in this district. And when I look at rural America, I look at all of the areas here in Northwestern Illinois, and we, instead of investing in fossil fuels, we have a real opportunity here to think ahead. And it's not just thinking ahead 5 or 10 years, it's thinking ahead to the next generation. To invest in greener, more sustainable energy sources that will create those good paying and union jobs of the next generation. And so we need to start thinking about that and talking about it.
Well said. Michael, did you want to add something? I saw your hand go up.
Oh, no,
You were just waving at me?
No, I was just nodding along with the great
Very
commentary.
good.
I would love to hear from some of my friends here, Bill and Ed, though.
Well, Ed, I have a question for you because we've talked about, getting the climate message on the ballot, getting people talking. And I'm not plugging my old campaign, but I ran for office and I was able to say that climate among the young voters was 1, 2, or 3. According to recent polls, I see where it's as low as number 10. Can you talk to, is polling confusing viewers about the authenticity of climate change? What is the true status, in your opinion, of the American mind on climate?
Yeah, thank you, Gary. But before I answer your question, actually, let me say that I actually know both Ashley and Eric professionally. I have worked with both of these incredible people, and they have worked with me professionally. And the reason why I am absolutely convinced we need to send them to Congress is because I know who these people are. I have worked with them in helping. My colleagues and I have built a program to help broadcast meteorologists like Eric, lean into this issue, help people understand what they intuitively understand anyway, which is that this isn't some distant issue that's happening in Bangladesh only. This seems to be happening in my backyard. And when Eric and now we have over 1,000 broadcast meteorologists around the country who are doing, as Eric was one of the first to do, which is help his viewers understand, yes, it's true. Your instincts are right. And Ashley, I know, because she has been part of the faculty that has helped me train broadcast meteorologists around the country. So these are people I know will not be fair weather candidates on climate. These people are climate people who are going to go to Washington and start kicking some ass as we need some asses kicked. So that was my preamble.
That was your kick-ass message.
To answer your question, Gary, I am happy to report, based on our polling data, that America is experiencing this extraordinary awakening on the issue of climate change. Over the past 5 years, you said earlier that, or somebody said earlier that Channing is an alarmist. Channing is not an alarmist about climate change. Channing is alarmed about climate change. Alarmists are needlessly worried about things. People who are alarmed about climate change, they understand that this is a real problem. It's not a distant problem. It's happening in our community wherever we live. And they understand we need to start doing things differently to put solutions in place. The proportion of Americans who are alarmed has gone from about 12% to currently 33% over the last 6-7 years. It's picking up steam. More and more Americans all the time are becoming alarmed about climate change, which is creating an extraordinary opportunity for candidates who are willing to authentically lean into this issue. So Ashley and Eric, their message is coming at exactly the right time. And Gary, just the one last point that you made, yes, climate is about 10th most important issue on voters' minds, but if you look at Democrats only, it's much higher than that. That would be the average of Democrats for whom it is a 1, 2, or 3 issue, and Republicans for whom it is an 18 to 30 issue. So while I actually work really hard to get both Democrats and Republicans elected who will be real climate hawks, I have a bunch of Republicans who work for me. Ashley and Eric are at the right time in the right place, and they're speaking to the right voters who care deeply about these issues. I believe I heard each of them say on a previous occasion that this is a number 1 or a number 2 issue among the Democratic voters in their districts.
Ed, thank you. And thank you for correcting my having used alarmist, a verb, because or a noun, it's a verb. It's alarmed. It's alarmed. It's a good catch, and I thank you. A question just came in for both of the candidates here. Climate risk equal investment risk. How can we communicate the economics of the exciting new clean economy better to the public? Ashley, let's start with you.
I think we have to think about this broadly, and we have to stop thinking about climate change as a single issue when we talk to people about risk and investment. For example, small businesses are the most vulnerable when an extreme event happens. And in Eastern North Carolina, we have a hurricane come through and serious flooding. What businesses are most disrupted by supply chain disruption, which we saw at COVID, right? Also, and disruptions in the labor force. If their assets are destroyed in these events, the lack of access to capital makes it hard for them to rebuild. So I think we have to be really specific with people about the economic risks that we're talking about that really matter to them. So I talked to them about the risk to small businesses, housing, the housing shortages that come in the wake of these events, where, I am heartbroken to learn that some of the people I worked with in 2018 are still living in RVs in Eastern North Carolina. I want people to think about this for a minute. This is not a vacation. This is mom and dad and multi-generational families, often their grandparents and a pet and kids living in an RV, and they've done this now through COVID. That's the economic risk that we're paying is, disruption in housing and schools and medical services and small businesses and economies that cannot recover before the next event happens, which is what we've seen in the Carolinas over and over, layered events. It is far more expensive to continue to invest dollars over and over in recovery than it is to actually spend dollars toward mitigation or real adaptation. I'm not talking about one-off adaptation. I'm talking about structural adaptation, which is what the IPCC report just showed.
Eric, would you like to add to the climate risk equal investment risk question?
Yeah, and I think, Ashley, I mean, you've hit it on the head. I mean, we need to continue to communicate how these events that we are seeing in now our communities are affecting everyday Americans. We're paying for climate change today. It's not just supply chain issues. We're paying more for our food today. When we had the record flood here on the Mississippi River just a couple of years ago, it was going to talk to the people there that were affected, and they can't afford to move up the bluff out of the harm's way. And I talk with people in our hometowns that we had the derecho that came across Iowa with 100-mile-an-hour winds. As we were tracking that on the radar, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. But then we got the ground truth confirmed that there was 100-mile-an-hour wind. And 5 hours after that storm had moved on beyond our coverage area, right here in the Quad Cities, I went outside and there were still 50-mile-an-hour winds. Without power here for 5 days, a tree landed on my house. And it's being able to connect those things and to say that if we don't do something about it, we're going to have even bigger problems in the future. And those are going to be really tough to overcome.
Thank you. I want to do a little housekeeping here. Again, folks, it's about awareness. It's about hearing from the candidates. It's about talking to our panelists, but we do want to raise money. I want to remind people, let's go to the websites, and we'll have an opportunity, Ashley and Eric, to remind people what your websites are. Donations and walking the walk, talking the talk. It's very, very important. Bill, I have a question for you. Let's pull back the curtain just a little bit. What issues does climate change also affect? Healthcare, we talked about security, other energy issues. How vast is climate change?
So I was, my mind was stewing on that as Ashley was speaking, because there's risks of climate change to all kinds of activities that the citizens of this country like to do on a daily basis, and all kinds of investments that they make that are potentially vulnerable to climate change. I'm thinking of all the hunters and sportsmen across the country, and also in Ashley's district in particular. They should be dramatically concerned about the impact of climate change on wildlife populations and fishes. All across the eastern US, there are people that are buying in a frenzy coastal real estate. They should be absolutely concerned about the rate of sea level rise, and that the rate of sea level rise is itself rising every year. That's a risk to that investment. It's a trickle down risk, and I thoroughly agree with Ashley that we need to get at the problem by getting at the first principles rather than cleaning up the mess. But it's just so many of these areas that are vulnerable and subject to risk from climate change. Agriculture, flooding and droughts affecting that, various kinds of health impacts, including the impact of heat itself, and just a host of other issues. And every time somebody mentions about climate change, they should be reminded that it's a risk to the lifestyle that they've come to enjoy in this country and around the world. So, I couldn't agree more that we need to get at this with first principles. We need to wean ourselves of fossil fuels and get on to types of energy sources that don't release carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, don't release inadvertently methane to the atmosphere. We need to have investment credits that allow companies to do research and development on those kinds of technologies, as well as to institute those across the country. And, one thing in North Carolina has been one of the leaders in solar power. I'd like to see it do a lot more. And one thing that's excited about, to me, about Ashley's candidacy is that she can carry to Washington these kinds of agendas that and get them to be, a subject of conversation on the Hill, so that something can finally be done about them.
Thank you. And Ashley, I'll let you comment on that in a second, but there's a question here from Frida. Hello, Frida. How will the candidates talk to regions hit with hurricanes, to your point, and floods who want to rebuild those areas. Eric, you're a weather person, so I'll let you start with that. How do you address those people who have seen a propensity of big weather,
Well,
dangerous weather?
And the problem that we have here is there is an equity problem because the floods as they happen along the Mississippi River are affecting the people that can least afford it. And so what are we doing to make sure not only that they're getting the help they need, but they're getting the assistance to move out of the floodplain? I met a lady in 2020 who was flooded out, and she goes, Eric, the biggest problem for me was the fact when the water came up into my basement and then went back down, we bought a new water heater. And then she said, then the record flood came and it flooded out our new hot water heater. And so she said, I had to buy a second one. And I thought to myself, what an exhaustive expense that was for her. And how are we, I know in my head, I know in my heart that we're going to have that record flood happen again. And it's probably only going to be a few years away. How are we helping that woman out? How are we helping our communities out?
Well, and to that point, it's a big economic issue. It's not just their economics, but when everyday Americans don't have disposable income because they bought 2 water heaters, it's a domino effect on the economy. So Ashley, go ahead.
I think one of the ways that we can address this from the federal policy standpoint is, I kind of put climate policy in 3 big buckets. One is sort of the mitigation, which is what we've been talking about a lot, which is reducing our dependency on fossil fuels and investing in renewables. But the middle bucket to me is really around resilience, and that has to do with disaster management, redoing the flood insurance program, overhauling the Stafford Act as it is, because right now it is not good enough to build back to the way it was. We need to be building back infrastructure and communities to be resilient for the next 50 years, right? Which we're not currently doing. And there are no incentives for states to invest in that kind of infrastructure, resilient to build resilient communities. And so we can use the arm of federal policy to ensure that states invest the way they should, so that the flood insurance program is redone, so that, a lot of times what happens is folks who are underinsured or not insured, they are not given enough money to fully rebuild their house, which is why you see tarps everywhere for many years after a hurricane comes. And so a lot of that is because it's based on the property value of their home. So you have vacation homes that are valued at higher property value, so they get more money in order to rebuild when the people that actually need it, as Eric was just talking about, actually don't have access to the funds they need. So really rethinking that middle bucket of resilience, disaster management, how we do flood insurance, and incentivize states to wisely invest in the resilient communities that they need to invest in.
Thank you. And this is a conversation, everyone. Your ideas are all welcome. We can listen to and advocate for certain things that we hear, and perhaps new ideas sprout up. Eric, in your experience, what expertise, and you've talked about it some, obviously, as a weather person, a meteorologist, no less, what do you bring to Congress, and you can talk about policy as well, to move us forward to address climate catastrophe?
The one thing that is different here, it is the fact that for 20 years, I've been talking with the people. I'll give you an example. I was in one of the smaller communities here, Kewanee, Illinois, and we're petitioning to get on the ballot right now. And a gentleman and his wife walked up to me, and I said, "Hi there, I'm Eric. I used to be, the meteorologist." "Oh, I know her. I know who you are." And I said, "I'm running for Congress. Would you consider signing my petition?" And the guy looks down, and it said Democratic Party at the top. And he said, I'm more of a Republican." And I said, "That's fine." I said, "What do you do for a living?" And he said, "Well, I'm a farmer. I'm a 3rd-generation farmer." And I said, "Oh, so you're on the front lines of climate change." And he said, "Yeah." He goes, I'm seeing it happen." And I said, "Yeah, your rain gauge is overflowing more frequently. You've got crops underwater, and then you've got drought. And then he said, this was key. He goes, I just don't know what we can do about it. And I said, that could be my job for you, to find out what we need to do about it, how we communicate something that is so complex. When I think of meteorology, I think we're at the bottom of the sea of the atmosphere. For me to put together a forecast, it's taking that data, parsing out the bad data, coming up with a conclusion, but then it's communicating it. And I've been talking for 15 years to Republicans, Democrats, and independents alike. And I've taken this incredibly polarizing thing and to take it to a level where people can understand it. And so someone who will advocate for the climate action with the foundation of the science, but with the experience of communicating it to everyone in the community.
It really isn't a party issue, is it?
No, not at all.
It's a human issue.
And-
A question.
and I think,
Oh, go ahead.
real quick, I think it's being able to talk with everyone about it. And that is key to us taking the partisan part out of climate change. And that's going to be essential.
Thank you for saying that. And I'd like to point out the websites of both of these candidates, Eric Sorensen, they've been going up there, and Ashley Ward. You both have materials and videos and things that really show how you communicate, how clear you are, how personable you are. And I encourage everyone to go to their websites, check them out, and go to the Act Blue that's been coming in. Let's help get them into Congress. A question came up, and it's for anyone, actually. What climate policies are out there that you don't like? Is there something out there like carbon pipelines to haul away the CO2, or are there policies that aren't working that need to go away? Maybe there isn't an answer to that, but I thought it's a good question. Maybe they're all good. I mean, yes, go ahead, Ashley.
So I'm just going to I'll start, honestly, Dr. Mann and some of the others probably are much more qualified to answer this question, but here is my perspective from a person who's worked in the resilient space, in communities. And one of the things that concerns me about some of the policies that people put forth, right, is that things like, I agree with the carbon tax, but we have to be very careful that lobbyists don't get into the middle of these things and then actually make it possible for them not to have the impact that we think, or possible for industries to continue to pollute. And so, things like trading, means that they're still polluting. And so I really think we have to be careful about what some of the proposals are, that we're not actually just creating a Band-Aid for bigger, better investment that would have more impact.
Eric, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, and I think that's right. One of the things that I look at and very carefully is, it kind of plays on something that Ashley said earlier. We can either do the right thing now, or we can innovate our way out of it in the future. And I learned from my father that everything in the future is going to cost more than it will today. And so when we look at the pieces of innovation and the discovery, we've got to be careful that what is on paper is really going to work. And so that's why I believe that number one, we need to decarbonize. And number one means as we go to this electric future, we need to make sure that there are renewable sources of energy. And for me, I see nuclear as an alternative that should be recognized.
Thank you. Michael, your hand is up. You're muted right now.
Ed had his hand up for longer though. So
okay, Ed. What a humanitarian.
Michael is a true gentleman. Thank you, sir.
He's a gentleman.
So Ashley is a leading expert on the issue of how climate change is affecting our health, and I'd really like to hear Ashley speak to the reverse of that, how climate solutions are good for our health, because I'm also a public health professional, and I'm absolutely convinced we as a nation, we've been looking at this all wrong. We've been looking at climate solutions as a cost, but I'm convinced that climate solutions are a huge benefit just waiting to be reaped, especially a huge benefit with regard to our health and reducing our healthcare costs. So Ashley, I'd love to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. This is my passion, so I could talk about this for the rest of the night. But to give you a couple of really specific examples, my area of research is in heat exposure and heat illness. In North Carolina, we spend about $20 million a year on emergency department visits for heat illness. Now, this is just emergency department visits. This is not wages loss. This is not productivity loss. This is not urgent care visits, any of those things. If we do not address the issues around climate change that increasing temperatures mean that our air quality is poor. It means that people who work in a vast number of occupations, it's not just farming, by the way, occupational exposure, factory workers, restaurant workers, logging industries. There are a vast number of people employed in occupations that put them at risk. I mean, that's just heat illness, not to mention my own research that showed the impact on preterm birth of heat exposure for pregnant women, which, by the way, is pretty significant, particularly in the Southeast, where we already have some of the worst maternal health outcomes in the nation. So we have not talked, I could go on about this. We haven't talked about asthma rates. We haven't talked about other kind of respiratory conditions where poor air quality, which is tied to higher heat, affects populations. These are enormous health costs that people pay, not just in doctor visits. That's the one thing I really want to emphasize. It's not just about going to the doctor. It is about losing time off of work, kids having to be out of school. All of these things cumulatively, we are paying enormous prices for an inaction on climate with respect to the health of our populations. And I cannot emphasize that. There's so many examples, but I'm trying to keep it short. I can't emphasize that.
No, Michael, you're such a patient gentleman. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I agree with so much of what's been said here. The cost of inaction is really what we should be talking about. The damage, the huge amount of damage and devastation that's being done in real time now by climate change in the form of these unprecedented extreme weather disasters, which we can now say, if you looked at or followed some of the coverage of the IPCC, the new UN climate impacts report that just came out the other day, we now have tools that allow us to connect the dots. We can say that these devastating extreme events would not be happening in the absence of human-caused climate change. One other point that I wanted to make here, and again, it gets at sort of the earlier discussion, we have to be careful when we talk about climate solutions to be talking about real solutions and not, allowing polluters to give lip service to false solutions that allow us to kick the can down the road. Promises of future technology, geoengineering, or massive carbon capture, something that has not been demonstrated. There's no evidence we can do that at the scale that would be necessary, but all too often it is used as a crutch, as an excuse for inaction today. Those of us who grew up, watching Popeye, I'll gladly pay you, Thursday for a hamburger. We'll gladly clean
Don't
up.
make them like they used to.
Sorry.
I knew that would be an opening for somebody. So, this idea that we can just clean up the mess down the road and it'll be cheaper to do that as a license to continue to pollute. And so as we move away from denial, because as we also heard here and Ed's numbers show, denial isn't tenable anymore. People can see that this is happening. As we move away from denial, we have to be aware of the other tactics that polluters are using to block progress. It's no longer, I like to say, delay is the new denial. They can't deny it's happening anymore, but there are all of these elaborate ways of kicking the can down the road. And we have to, hold them responsible for these, insidious tactics that are still being used to prevent the action that's necessary.
Thank you, Mark. Eric, your hand went up and I'm going to let you respond to that, but I'm going to add a question to it as well. Mm-hmm. You're in the media. You are in the front lines. In addition to what you're going to say, I want you to add to it, how do we keep this front and center in the news cycle? There's something always more important than climate change. So it
Yeah,
seems
yeah.
to news directors. How do we keep it fresh?
Yeah, I think for me, it was coming to the decision internally that I have a moral responsibility to make sure, just like I'm telling a town before a tornado comes in, I have a moral responsibility as a meteorologist to speak about the science. And we've found that climate change is not the third rail that so many meteorologists think it is. And when we start telling the real stories of the real people that are impacted, we make a difference because it connects with people. It connects with our neighbors. And so I think going forward, the way that we can do this is that we can start speaking about our values and what we hold in our hearts. Okay. And so when we talk about these big extreme weather events, we need to understand that it's not just that they're happening today. These are going to get worse as our climate warms. And so we've got to prepare for that, but we've also got to communicate that it's necessary that we do something about it.
You know, I for one, and I'd like to point out that contributions are coming in. I'm very happy to report to you too. For me, it's really encouraging to meet two candidates who are so personable. You both have made this part of your lives, your moral responsibility, and it's really nice to hear the message delivered that way. You know, I mean, for what it's worth, you're very authentic, both of you, and it's wonderful. We're not running out of time just yet, but we will run out of time fairly soon. And so I'd sort of like, if I could, hear from everyone. And Marav, I've seen you put your hand up. I'm going to sort of toss to you first, you know, some thoughts that you have and whatever it is that you would like to comment on right now. Marav?
Yeah, thank you. I'm very impressed with our candidates, excited to support you in your journey, hopefully successful journey. We'll do our best to help you. I think that we are so focused on climate change and carbon accumulation in the atmosphere, but actually fossil fuels, in addition to, you know, causing wars and resource conflicts, are also a major source of pollution. I started my opposition and my realization that we need to start weaning ourselves of fossil fuels back in 1989 after the Exxon Valdez oil spill. And I still work in that system so many years later. And the effects of the oil spill are still noticeable. Of course, now they're compounded by climate change because you know, things have not slowed down or stopped. But we have to think about not just human health, not about climate change, floods, fires, but also on the other components of fossil fuels, which is a huge problem both to biodiversity and human health, which is pollution. It is amazing to me that we are still dealing with fossil fuels, given all the damage that we have experienced because of them. And I think we need to wean ourselves from this resource, and we need to make sure our politicians are weaned from, or bring in new politicians that are not funded. And just a word on funding. It is extremely important, and please donate to these campaigns. Just as a small note, I'm still recovering from my 2020 campaign, so financially. So please, guys, just put it in there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ashley.
Well, that's actually a good transition to what I was following up on what Eric was saying earlier, and the idea of using narrative to connect with people, which is so very important at relating to people. You know, Eric and I are not only just experts in climate, right? We've both been trained through programs like EDS on how to communicate to the general public about climate. And so it isn't enough to only have expertise, right? You also have to be able to communicate the importance of the work that we're doing and the urgency of this moment. And we've both been trained to do so. But in part, that's also kind of what makes things difficult, because one of the reasons we don't have a climate scientist in Congress right now is it's actually really hard to do it because we've been building our expertise over the last decade. We haven't been building up a war chest for a political campaign run. And so this pathway is somewhat narrow for those of us like Eric and myself, who are trying to step out of a career, right, and into public service to bring that expertise that we have. I mean, just to give you some numbers of how expensive it is, my district, and the Democrats and unaffiliated, North Carolina unaffiliates can vote for Democrat in the primary. So we got about 130,000 people who came out in the 2020 election. We're on the ground. We've got a strong ground game, but we're not going to be able to knock all of those doors. Just to send one postcard mailer to the people in my district that I likely won't hit will be $48,000 in postage. So just to let people understand the numbers that we're talking about, if we want one billboard on I-40 in my district, that's $5,000 to $9,000 depending upon where that billboard is placed. If we want yard signs, that's another $9,000 in yard signs. So what I'm trying to emphasize is we want more people, experts in Congress that can make more informed policy choices and convince our colleagues in Congress to take the action that we need to take. But it also means that we've been using this time in our career over the last 20 years, right, building that expertise in order to do that and not raising funds for a political race. So donations are super important to both of us. Eric, I'm not trying to speak for you, but I know we've had conversations about this.
Yeah,
It's very
definitely.
important for us. So I really appreciate all of you doing this tonight.
Well, it's certainly a pleasure from my end. And thank you for saying that. And Eric, would you like to add? I mean, yes, it costs a lot of money.
Exactly. And that was one of the things that I realized very early on was, it's very convenient when some candidates can just write a check to their own campaign. And, when we have to ask our questions, why are there so many lawyers in Congress? It's because lawyers support one another. And so if we want climate scientists in Congress, we need the support of climate scientists. It's really time to rally, behind our own. And right here, we've got lots of excitement. And I have spent almost all of my career in 2 of the TV markets that are here, but there's still one TV market, Peoria, Illinois, that we're going to buy ads on. And that's only going to happen as we develop the fundraising that's going to take us over the finish line. And so it's asking people to make that financial contribution that's going to help us not only see the finish line, but get over it as we get toward Election Day.
Thank you. And your websites have been going up and the Act Blue. We are running out of time. This could go on all night as far as I'm concerned, but we have a promise that we made. So I'm going to put everybody on the spot that's a panelist here. You've got 10 to 12 seconds. Give me your sound bite pitch for the evening. Bill, I'm going to start with you.
Well, I'm down here in District 4 where Ashley's running. I know that she grew up here, went to school here, worked here, had her kids here. She understands the local issues, which include crime and guns and drugs and education. But the thing that's really attractive for me is that she also understands this national and international issue that we need real help on at the national level. So we've been significant donors to her campaign, and I hope you'll join us.
Thank you. Ed, you got 10 seconds.
Yeah, neither Ashley nor Eric is ever going to represent me in Congress, but I'm going to work like hell to get them to Congress because they're going to represent all of our children, and that's what's most important.
Brilliant. Ditto. You're not in my district either, but I'm excited about your candidacies. Mirav?
I just want the audience to imagine what it will be to have Ashley and Eric standing on the floor of Congress, of the House, and advocating for climate action. Not talking to those Congress people who then can make up their minds whether they will advocate or not, but actually standing on the floor and doing the advocacy to all of us. So please.
Well said. Michael, bring it on home.
Yeah, well, we don't have 10 years. We don't have 4 years. We have to act now to address the climate crisis. And so we need, people like Eric and Ashley in Washington, D.C., working for all of us to preserve this planet for future generations.
Thank you. All right, Ashley, I give you the floor for we only have a few seconds, a couple of minutes left. Your closing statement.
I just want to thank everybody tonight. A lot of the people on this panel are people who are my mentors. And so it's a great honor for me to be here on the same panel with them. I am, like I said before, a lifelong resident of this district. I am from a working class family, and I understand a lot of issues, but particularly the issue around climate change and how it impacts our everyday lives. And I will fight for my children and your children. And I really mean it.
Thank you. Eric?
And it's, for me, it's working with someone like Ashley, who understands the implications of how climate change is impacting everyday Americans, and using my scientific and my communication background to be able to bust through the partisan divide and actually get to the people to communicate them. We have a poll that shows that climate change is a top issue right here in Illinois 17. And the people here, they trust the meteorologist who's been with them for the past 20 years to tell them the truth and to represent them in handling the climate crisis. We haven't had a meteorologist in Congress in nearly 50 years. With your help, let's make that happen.
Thank you. Well, on my behalf, I'm proud to have been asked to be the moderator and to meet all of you and to hear you, the panel of experts. And I've met two candidates that I am firmly, I'm a loud barking dog, and I'm going to make a lot of noise. And I encourage all of you you tuned in because you understand the seriousness of climate action. And you've met two candidates who need your support. They really need your help. You see their websites, check them out. I believe there are even contact options on there where you can ask them questions. They're two of the most personal candidates I've ever met. Take advantage of how human they are. This is where your donations are important, and there are other ways to contribute. Be a barking dog too. Let people know. Share this podcast, share their videos, share the message. The website, realclimatecandidates.com. Use the links there to take you exactly to their page. Support now makes all the difference in terms of their ability to message on the most important electoral issue, literally the most important electoral issue of all time. On behalf of our candidates, the panel members, Channing, and your team, thank you all. Have a wonderful night, and let's get in the fight. Good night, everybody.